Small. Wow, tiny.
You are currently listening to Tiny Table,
where we explore TTRPGs you might not have heard of.
Whether big or small, we hope to cover them all.
Because we know that great things can come in tiny packages.
Hello everyone and welcome to Tiny Table, where no game is too small. From rules to rolling to review, we teach RPGs so you can play too. And welcome to our interview with the wonderful developers of the magical land of Yeld. This is the first half of our interview. We're going to be putting this out for the main feed for everybody, and make sure that if you are a Patreon member to join us on Patreon for the part 2 of the interview on our side table. I am Julian. We've got here with us as well Neo and Skylar.
Hello.
And if our lovely guests from Yeld would like to introduce themselves, if we could have your names, pronouns, and your roles in the development at Yeld Studios.
Well, my name's Jake Richmond. That's they, them. Nick and I kind of share the writing and design duties, but in addition to that, I am the artist for the Magical Land of Yeld.
Yeah, and I'm Nick Smith, he, him, and yeah, I'm co-writer of the Magical Land of Yeld.
I was going to say, we are also siblings.
Yes.
Oh, that's crazy. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
And we've been working together off and on for about, I think, 15 years.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeld's been our biggest project, but we've definitely done several together.
That's awesome. How long have you been working on Yeld together?
Well, I'm trying to think. Jake originally came up with the idea, and that was, oh my gosh, so long ago at this point, 2007 maybe?
Well, maybe 7, yeah, very long time ago.
Very early, and then, did some work on it here and there. And then eventually, Jake had invited me to participate in working on it, and I think that was around, 2012, 2013. So it's a project we've been working on for a very long time at this point.
Wow, it shows. It's a lovingly crafted rulebook, and one that really does a lot in terms of providing a full and robust tool set to its players. I'd love to jump into our first question here, because it does have kind of to do with the core principles of Yeld. A lot of fantasy tabletop role-playing games tend to focus on characters in their adult lives. You'll have characters progress from up-and-coming young adult to grizzled veteran adventurer. What drove Yeld's decision to exclusively feature and focus on children as the player characters?
Well, I think it's exactly that. Pretty much every other game you can think of, you're playing adult. That is very done. I mean, there's lots of space to explore that, of course. But we wanted to make something different from the beginning. I think the genesis of the idea way back when I first came up with it was, wouldn't it be cool to play as kids who were out on this huge adventure, who were out doing something fun, away from adults where they were free and able to explore and do whatever they wanted. And that's certainly not a new idea at all. I mean, we can look at so many different things that do that, and there's so many different role-playing games that even do that too, but despite that, it's a relatively unexplored space within tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah, I found that as someone who's played mostly a lot of the big dogs in the TRPG space, this was one of the aspects of Yeld that I found super, super refreshing in our own play, because it made me think differently about the type of character I wanted to create and what that character would care about.
Yeah, so much of those decisions, right, specifically like playing kids, is about creating certain types of narratives, right? It puts a player in a particular mindset. It changes the things you care about. It changes the types of actual threats that you might have in a game. What is and isn't dangerous, what is and isn't complicated changes because you're kids, and that's really interesting, and that's really fun to explore.
I'm pretty old. I am 47 this year. But when I was young, I read both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, as well as played the early Zelda games in the same year. So in my mind, Frodo Baggins and Link were kind of the same character, but also they were both like 10 years old. And that's been kind of an archetype in my head ever since then, this young kid who goes on this amazing adventure with their friends and, discovers this new world. And on top of that, I think at the time when I was younger, there were a lot of adventures, things that we might think of as isekais now, about, traveling to another world and discovering a new world. And, in the modern isekai, those characters are normally adults, but when I was young, very often those were children.
Yeah, shoutouts to Digimon being one of the first and maybe also one of the best like child featuring isekais out there. Definitely can see like some of that inspiration with like how Yeld in the Door works.
Oh, absolutely.
100%.
I'm thinking it really reminds me of Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia. I mean, there's even like a magic door that crosses over into fantastical realm as children. So that's kind of what my reference point was for approaching this story of Yeld. So yeah, it was really fun to kind of play my own Narnia fantasy, quote-unquote, isekai adventure.
I also found that something I quite like about the framing of the children is, you know, you choose your child archetype before you choose your job, and having those be two different choices gave a fun kind of balance to the characters, especially because I love the element where every kid archetype is kind of primarily defined by a flaw, a kind of archetypal childlike flaw, like I'm the most important here for the princess, or I can solve my problems with violence for the bully. Like, there aren't really any archetypes who have just like, oh, I'm like a well-adjusted kid who's doing great, everything is fine. Like, they all kind of come built in with childlike issues to solve that gets you out of that mindset of trying to create like an optimized character on the writing level.
Yeah, well, and I love that, right? I love the idea that it's like it's a narrative prompt that you get to engage with immediately, so you can kind of set the tone of your character. But it's also something you can like fight against, and it's also something you grow out of over time, because growth is such an important part of the game. Getting older, changing, giving up your childhood to become a hero. Those are big aspects of the game. And so that initial friend types, the whole goal of that is to be something to overcome, right? Or even lean into if you really want to.
Mm-hmm.
Something we tried really hard to do is present the game not from a parent perspective, but from a child perspective. We don't want you as players saying, this is how I see children as an adult or as a parent or as like an older sibling, but rather we want it to be, this is how I as a kid see the world. This is how I see the world of adults. This is how I see the world I live in and I inhabit it. So we try to take that perspective in every part of the game, except the lore. The lore of Yeld is presented as a history and as something that has existed outside the kids and separate from the kids. But there is also a perspective of the kids coming into Yeld and seeing it for the first time. You see that a lot with the monster names, which may not necessarily be the actual name that the people of Yeld have for things, but they're names that the kids give them instead. Especially, you see that a lot in the spells like Fire Hat, or I can't think of any other examples, but stuff like that.
Yeah, I feel like this kind of child-first perspective is continued through just the formatting of the book, especially namely these kind of comics that are scattered throughout the book to help tell the basic intro story of Yeld, to introduce us to elements of the lore, and I think most engaging is how Yeld, the book, uses comics to express its rules. We love how the rulebook uses comics with a recurring cast of friends to teach the mechanics and flesh out the world. What inspired you to create comics to use as a way to explain the rules?
Well, I'm a comics person. I have been since I was a kid. And by that I mean both that I've loved comics, but I also wanted to draw comics since I was like 10 years old. And I've worked in comics off and on for a long time. I have a long-running webcomic called Modest Medusa, which is very heavily tied into the magical land of Yeld.
Ooh.
When I started doing game work with Nick back in 2005, 2006, I was kind of struck that there were not any games that really used comics as a tool. I also come from an education background. And what I discovered as a teacher is that comics are a great teaching tool. Personally, I have a lot of trouble picking up a textbook and absorbing that information. I will just stare at it and will read the same pages over and over again. I know a lot of people have the same problem. And I know a lot of kids, especially a lot of young people, have that problem where they can't engage with a big textbook. And so many rule books are just that. They are just a big textbook.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was learning to play Dungeons & Dragons back when I was young, and then again when I was in college, and again briefly when I worked at a Wizards of the Coast store when the third edition Dungeons and Dragons came out. We were trying to teach it to people in the store. I was realizing that the ways I was trying to explain the game, the ways I was trying to process the game, were very much like a comic. And as a teacher, I used those tools as well. I would create little comics. I would draw comics on the whiteboard for my students, and I realized they would really unpack that, and that was really useful for them. So one of the very early goals with Yeld back when we started developing it as a set of rules and not just a house game we were playing was that it would use comics to teach. It would use comics as a tool to engage the players and to draw them into the book. We did not want to create a situation where the game master was the one responsible for learning all the rules and knowing all the rules. We wanted everybody to participate in the game. So that meant we needed to have players interested enough to pick up the book and read it and learn it, even if they were not going to be the ones necessarily who were going to be running the game that session, or even maybe at all. So both the narrative comics that, introduce the characters and invite you to explore the setting, and the rules comics that break down step for step how different rules work are part of that approach.
Yeah, as someone who is very, open about my struggles with ADHD, education has always been kind of a weird thing for me because I don't learn in the same ways as other people necessarily. If you put just a giant block of text, I'll never get through it. My a sort of little admission, maybe of guilt or just of how I operate. I've never actually read the player's handbook for D&D 5th edition, despite playing it now for several years. The way
Don't worry, Skylar, you're in the majority of players when you say that.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, lovely. Okay, I won't get flamed on the internet then. But it's funny because the way that I learned to play was through watching other people play. It was through having a visual engaging element that could kind of teach me directly, oh, they're doing this. When they make a mistake, I instantly clock that mistake. And, of course I went in for specific spells for my druid or whatnot, those little micro reads. But for the most part, I learned in the moment. And I felt with Yeld, I didn't have to watch someone else play. I didn't have to, sit down and torture myself to sit around for 3 hours. It's so engaging and stimulating that the rules came so naturally to me that even after not playing for a week, when we came back to record, I was remembering small details because they were hidden in little pieces of comics. So as someone who I feel that design ethos of education for rules really targets, I found this incredibly helpful.
Well, that's awesome, right? As someone who is also suffering from that, I absolutely understand not being able to consume all of this text, right? And hold on to that information and being able to regurgitate it and use it, right? So it's good to hear that as someone who, struggles with being able to pay attention, that you were able to get through it. That's the goal, right? There's sort of a culture with role-playing games where you're not really expected to learn the game you're playing. And that's not the fault of the people, it's the fault of there being so many role-playing games that aren't actually finished, complete games. And so you have to take it and do the job of finishing it. And usually that means trying to explain the rules to other people because they can't actually read it themselves. So it's really important to us that anybody can just pick this book up and get through it and enjoy their time reading it too, right? I don't want it to be a chore, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I thought the comics were a stroke of genius. I think everything that you brought up, Jake, your points are very salient. I appreciate your approach as a comics artist, a game designer, an educator, really all came through together in this perfect blend to create a very digestible rules experience.
Well, thank you very much. I don't want to take all the credit here. Nick and I spend a lot of time talking about, can we make this easier to understand? Can we make this simpler to understand? But also, what parts of the game can we allow to be more complex? What kinds of games can we allow to exist in this state where you have to dive into them and you have to spend the time with them? And then what do we have to do to get players there? I'm sure you noticed the Yeld rulebook it's a big book, a few hundred pages, and that is daunting. It was daunting for us because previously, before we wrote Yeld, all of our previous games were in the 40 to 70 page range. And so creating something this big is just a huge undertaking, especially for just two people. And we have a few people we work with, but as far as actually creating content for our books and designing rules, it's just Nick and I.
Wow.
Yeah, and it takes a while. I mean, to do something like this, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you already mentioned that this is basically over a decade in the making. So the effort really shows, and I think that, you know, collaborative aspect has led to something that's honestly friggin' cool. I'm excited for y'all to eventually hear the postmortem, because we did have a lot of praise for a large variety of things that Yeld presents in its rulebook.
Well, thank you. We're really excited to hear that. We're really excited
sure.
to see what you all have done.
Yeah, and with that, speaking of things we praise, I'd love to get into the dice system specifically. We as players definitely got super hyped whenever we got to grab just like a huge handful of D6s and roll them for any skill or attack. We were kind of curious what inspired and drove the development of the game's dice systems, and if there were any lessons you kind of learned by creating this dice system, you know, challenges or otherwise, that you experienced.
Yeah, so the dice mechanic, this is again something that Jake had originally come up with, a very simple system. One thing that we really like to tell people when we're kind of pitching the game is that it's like, Yeld is a game you can play with just the stuff you have at home, right? Everybody's got like a box of Yahtzee with some dice in it. Everybody's got a chessboard, right? Which is your 8x8 grid for the action board. And so because of that, it lends itself to being very simple. After that, Jake came up with, I think, what is a very simple but very like aesthetically pleasing thing, which is the more dice you roll, the better you feel about it, right? Like more dice, more numbers, that's fun. And I think when you're thinking about kids playing the game, that's the kind of thing they're going to really latch onto.
I think we said something similar when we were actually reviewing the system itself. We were like, man, I feel like a kid getting to roll all these dice.
Yeah, the guide for us was that it should be as simple as possible. And to an extent, I often don't think of it so much as, you know, a dice system, so much as just the basics of what you can do with dice. You're just using D6s, you're just rolling a few dice to start. Then you're choosing what dice you want to add to that. You know, you always have your core dice, you're always rolling your strong dice, your tough dice, your brave dice. But do I want to add my sneak attack dice to that? Do I want to add my rogue dice to that? So it's very simple, and keeping it as simple as possible was the goal, especially since having a simple front end allows us to do more complex things in the back end. More complex things like the action chain or special dice that have certain effects and stuff like that.
That was something I brought up as a big favorite of mine, and something I'm taking a lot of inspiration from during our post-mortem, was that exactly what you said there, a simple chassis that can then beget nuance and depth, because it's always going to wrap back around to a really intuitive core resolution mechanic. Like, you're never going to run into a situation where you want to use a special die, you start rolling it, and then you're like confused, like, oh, but how exactly does that integrate into this core resolution? It's like, it's a special die. It means you roll another die, the same as every other special die. And then every little nuance can come and be bespoke and tailored and specific, but it's never going to fundamentally muddle up this core system that is nice, simple, and easy to read and just do with the dice you already have. One of my favorite little details of it is that in combat, right, if you want to use a certain combat special die, it's going to lead to you rolling more dice and thus increasing your chances of success with whatever attack you're doing. But it also changes what your attack does, and it's almost always a change that takes it off of doing direct damage to the tough dice, which is kind of you'd call it kind of the default mode of victory, right? I reduced the monster to 0 hit points in a different system. And having it, you always have this little decision back and forth of like, do I want slightly fewer dice, but I'm just hitting the tough dice, the thing I'm kind of defaulting to aim for? Or do I want a higher chance of succeeding at something creative, but kind of tertiary that might affect its ability to hit me, or its ability to interrupt my friends? And it's like a really simple design choice, but just by having that be the core crux of how combat special dice work, each one of them always involves meaningful decision making without ever feeling like you're making like the wrong choice.
I think what we do is we ended up, adding on top of that as well, right? So you have these choices that you're making, and then as the action chain progresses, which is where, if you succeed and you pass it to a friend, they're going to get a bonus, that influences as well, right? So you think, I need to hit this monster, I got to get rid of his tough dice, but I'm not necessarily going to be able to do that. So instead, I'm making a different choice, right? I'm going to trip him, right? And in doing so, I trip the monster, that's great, But what I'm actually doing is that I'm increasing this action chain, right? I'm making it easier for the next friend to actually do the thing they need to do.
Yeah, teamwork is a big part of the game. I'm sure you noticed that. Teamwork and planning ahead. I can't hurt the monster now, but I can set up my friends so they can hurt the monster. Or the monster has really heavy armor, so I need to focus on breaking the monster's armor so that in the next round, I or maybe my friend can actually do damage.
Yeah, it was actually something that was a big decision-making factor for me in choosing what oath I wanted to take for the Oathbreaker, because I really like the idea of, if I go, I believe it's honor, I can never have a monster roll higher than me. I will always be at least even, if not better, in any opposed roll against an enemy. But I was looking at the attack chain and I was like, God damn it, if that is not such a cool feature, I do not want to miss out on that, especially with only like a 3-person party. Like if we had more people, we had like 4 or 5 playing, it'd be like, okay, different story. They can still get that rolling, that's fine. But it was definitely such an exciting feature that it made me choose the Oath of Courage instead, which also was incredibly fun. So I definitely like, how much teamwork is baked into everything that Yeld presents.
Opportunity cost is a big part of our design philosophy. We purposely set up the game so that the friends just cannot be good at everything. You don't have enough core dice to be good at being strong, tough, brave, and smart. You can be really good at one of those, pretty good at 2 of those, okay at 3 of those, or bad at 4 of them. And those are your options. So you have to rely on your friends. You have to make choices. You have to, choose between the Oath of Courage or one of the other oaths. You can't have both. And we think that creates interesting play. We think that does create choices. I know something that comes up a lot in discussion around Dungeons & Dragons combat, for example, is choice paralysis, where you're playing the game and you're not really sure what you want to do that turn, so you just default to, your standard attack or your Eldritch Blast or whatever. And, choice paralysis is also an issue in Yeld in the sense that you have a lot of options, but instead what we hope is that you're excited by those options and you want to explore them. So it's not actually choice paralysis. What you get is this buffet of choices you've already made about stuff you want to be good at, which you then get to try to do. And sometimes that's situational. You don't always get a chance to use your oath every turn or every fight, but when it does come up, which will be fairly often, it's going to be really neat.
Fantastic stuff there. It's a core dice system that we had a ton of fun with, and I think we will have a lot of fun with it on any return trips to the magical land of Yeld. And speaking of that magical land itself, the lore of the world of Yeld is incredibly rich. It highlights everything from like a vast, multi-generational, violent history to everything from small wonders and little holidays for the friends to celebrate. Everything across that spectrum gets highlighted in the core rulebook. Where did crafting this world fall within the game design process? When were there moments where mechanics informed the construction of the lore, and vice versa? When did lore inform the mechanics that you designed?
Well, I think oftentimes when we're working, we are of the mindset that the lore, the themes you're presenting, your narrative should be the thing that actually informs the mechanics of the game. Because the goal of the mechanics is to allow you to facilitate a very specific experience. Mm-hmm. That's the point of Yeld, right? Everything is tailored and tuned for this very specific experience we presented, even to the point where we're presenting like a full campaign for you to play as well, right? And we think the more you tailor that experience, the more interesting and bespoke and special it gets to be compared to using a more generic system.
Or just another system.
Yeah.
I think we definitely started with themes first when we were working on this. When I had the initial idea, it was, I want to do a through the door, through the looking glass kind of style adventure with kids. And then, because we worked on the game so long and because it started as a house game and then we were playing it with friends here in the Pacific Northwest. We were driving up to Seattle and playing with people, or we were sending PDF down to people in, like San Francisco and stuff and playing with them. Slowly, we would hear what they were doing in their games and we would, introduce ideas from our games and that would become the actual lore. But when we released the first edition of Yeld in 2019, and when we were working on it in the years before that, it was kind of, I don't want to say setting agnostic because the setting is Yeld, but what we wanted people to do was create a Yeld of their own, so it had a very bare bones setting. And since then, we have developed a lot more for it. A lot of the development has come through my comic Modest Medusa, which is about a young monster who comes from Yeld to our world and meets a family and starts living with them, and then they eventually return to Yeld and have adventures there. So a lot of that lore got developed there, but a lot of it is also, Nick and I are constantly coming up with ideas, we're constantly talking about ideas, we're constantly turning those narrative bits into rules and developing what they are. I think we take a very, it's going to sound a little old-fashioned, we take very much an MMO approach to it, where I very much see Yeld as like a living MMO that we invite people to come in and play, and that we're constantly updating and constantly changing and constantly introducing new ideas to. So there's always going to be, a new event happening. There's always going to be a holiday to go and visit that has limited, rewards that you can get just on that day. Or there's always going to be this cool boss monster to go and fight somewhere that may not be there next week within the game time. And that, provides endless story opportunities for us, and we can keep iterating on that. We can keep coming up with new ideas because, of course, we're always coming up with new ideas.
I think that tie between MMOs and Yeld is a very healthy kind of model for a long form, like a more robust RPG like Yeld to take, where it is very much a living document of a game. I'd love to see more folks take that approach. It also feels very fitting to the fact that there are a lot of little nuances in Yeld's world that are a lot of loving homages to kind of classic fantasy RPG video games. Like, I love that there's like specifically, they're called Black Mage, White Mage, and Red Mage, and they're not classes, they're jobs. My Dragon Quest heart is over the moon right now. It's a lot of really beautiful stuff that feels evocative of that sense of video gaminess without losing a sense of reality and lived inness, my verisimilitude in this world.
Yeah, video games are such a huge influence for us. Like, some of my earliest memories are like watching Jake play video games, right? Watching Jake play Secret of Mana, right? Watching Jake play Legend of Zelda. It's that kind of thing that like is such a huge influence. And I think that's sort of because we have such similar backgrounds, we have such similar ideas, we share a very singular mind when it comes to what Yeld is. Very rarely do we butt heads about it. We are very much on the same wavelength.
Which doesn't mean we don't disagree sometimes, but I think one of the benefits of us being who we are, being siblings and working very closely together, as opposed to, I've worked in a lot of situations on a lot of different games as a freelancer where I don't know the other people I'm working with, and I don't really know what they're up to, and I don't really know what they want or what they're interested in, and that can create really divided results. Where Nick and I are so in sync that, very often when Nick comes to me and says, I have this really cool idea for something, I'm not surprised by it. It's not too far from what I was thinking anyway. Or if it's something that completely blows me away, that's exciting because I'm completely blown away by it and I'm instantly in. There's very rarely a point where one of us says, no, that's a bad idea, or no, that's not a good idea. And when that does happen, what we find is that between us, we can very usually find a solution to that. I think a big part of that, as Nick just said, is that we are coming from the same place with so many of our interests, and so many of our interests is tied into, video games that we played when we were growing up, and as adults as well. We played so many MMOs together: World of Warcraft, City of Heroes, all these games. We played Final
City of
Fantasy
Heroes,
11.
let's go!
Yeah.
Oh my God, Yeld might have been a superhero game if we had gone in that direction. Built around teamwork and doing stuff together. But Final Fantasy 11 was a huge influence for us. Our action chain mechanic comes directly from Final Fantasy 11. I don't know what the name of the mechanic is there.
Yeah, they had like a combo mechanic.
Yeah, where each character gets to build up their action gauge and then do a limit break, and that stacks from character to character until... and we thought that was an amazing mechanic, and so that was a very early addition to our game. And we wear our influences on our sleeve. You can look at Yeld, and you're not going to, if you're familiar with these games, you're going to be able to point to it and go, well, I know what a Black Mage is. And you're going to see that the Drudge Angel is very much the Dragoon from Dragon Warrior and so on and so forth. Our influences are very plain, I think. And
Hey, great artist steal.
yeah, exactly. And this is this is a cultural thing. I feel Yeld is in a lot of ways, as much as it's about children learning to embrace their childhood, but also growing up. It's also about the culture surrounding this aspect of gaming. That is video games, the PS1 and PS2, and Nintendo 64 games, and tactical RPGs and stuff like that. It's very much a love letter in a lot of ways.
You know, it's really awesome that Yeld wears so many inspirations on its sleeve. You know, to people who are familiar with that era, with the culture, they're going to see these references that oh yeah, I remember that, or oh yeah, you know, this is familiar to me. But to any newcomers, like, these are cool, iconic images. It creates a cohesive world, which is great because you two are kind of coming from the same place, you know, having a similar wavelength. I feel like, you know, this is not one of the questions we included, but I have to ask. There's kind of a, you know, not only is the story about children, but there's a lot of childlike nature to it, from simplicity to, like, these archetypes. Do you intend Yeld to be also accessible to children? That's kind of a big thing right now, is, like, TRPGs and kids. Like, there's all these, like, after-school programs, which Julian was a part of, teaching kids and running games for them. So is Yeld a child-friendly system?
I want to say absolutely yes, but not entirely yes. We designed the system to be easy to learn. We designed it to be accessible to new players, and we wanted it to be something that, as kids, you can get into. You can get into it by yourself if you're in the, like, I don't know, 10 or 11 or 12-year-old range. You can get into it with your older siblings. You can play it with your family. You can play it with your older friends. That was always the goal. At the same time, we tell people that Yeld is an all-ages game, and by that we mean it's a game for children and for adults. And because of that, sometimes there's going to be stuff in the game that you might look at it and you go, I don't know if that's exactly for kids. There is history of violence in the magical land of Yeld. It is a place where real people live and have suffered from wars and magical disasters and famines and depression and all kinds of horrible stuff. And we don't hide that. That's not the focus of the game, but we want it to be a place, you know, where you can feel like people live and people do things. Similarly, we talk a little bit about the lives of the people who live in Yeld, of the various people who live there. It's not just one species, it's not just human, but there's fairies and mermaids and goblins, and they all live around each other and they all live together. And we talk about how some of them have mixed families, and some of them are LGBTQ people, like myself, and you know how that relates to the world. And I think sometimes people will say, well, that's not necessarily for kids, but I feel like it's weird if, you know, you are a player, whether you're a kid or adult, and you enter this fantasy world, and you know, we tell you a little bit about the people who live there, but we don't tell you, you know, that there were wars that happened, or that they have disagreements over things, or you know what their marriage customs are, or how they raise their families together. So we want children to be able to play the game, but we also want adults to be very, you know, comfortable and very excited to explore the game as well. And we think there's a lot of room for both of that, both of the audiences.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I guess when I asked my question, I wasn't trying to be diminutive of its world. And I also think, you know...
Oh, no, not at all.
I remember as a child loving Redwall as a series, which was... and Warrior Cats, which were both incredibly violent and about, like, children and war and history. I think we don't give kids enough credit. I think children, maybe of the 10 to 11-year-old range, are very capable of engaging in real... history in these kinds of more complex sort of cultures and their interactions. And we really appreciate Yeld taking the time to include that, right? Include the history of war and the history of territory and the people who once ruled Yeld, who no longer rule it, who move around. We think it creates a really full adventure. And speaking of full adventures, Yeld's rulebook features a full campaign that could occupy even, you know, a group of people up to a year or even more. What drove your decision to include such a large adventure at no additional cost? You know, what are your experiences like running or playing the Yeld adventure yourselves?
Well, I would say that I don't think our original intention was really to actually have all of these finished adventures for everybody to play. it just, over time, as we were designing the game, as the game became a more bespoke experience, right? Part of that had to be that we were creating super unique sort of bosses that you were going to fight. A big part of the game is collecting these keys from these various bosses. And so each one of those experiences needed to be super unique, right? Something that was different than any other type of adventure you were going to have in Yeld. So what became essentially a very small section explaining, these are the hunters of Yeld, these are the big boss fights, go ahead and design some monsters for it. It became a, 100 and something page section that covers 7 very unique adventures plus an extra one in the end for the big bad boss.
You have to hit all the biomes.
Yeah, and it allowed us to create a more unique experience that way.
I think originally, like Nick said, that was just not the plan, but there was very much a structure of this is a Legend of Zelda game. You are this kid and you are going on this adventure. You're going to fight 7 boss monsters and collect their 7 things, just like you go to 7 dungeons in Zelda and collect 7 pieces of the Triforce, and then you get to unlock the door and go home. That was always our North Star design goal. But they didn't evolve into the characters they are in the adventures they are until much later in the process. When we were getting ready to publish the original version of the game, the Hunters of Yeld fights were the very last thing Nick wrote. We had fleshed out the characters, and some of those characters had been characters we had been talking about for years. Some of them were characters that showed up in our house game campaign or in the Modest Medusa comic, and we knew we wanted to develop them into these boss monsters. And at the time, I think we even referred to the boss monsters and their adventures as temples, much like, again, in Legend of Zelda. But it wasn't until Nick really sat down and developed these unique adventures that were all going to be part of one big campaign that we kind of solidified what they are and what the structure for playing Yeld is. That became very much the structure of the game. You can do whatever you want when you come and play Yeld. You don't have to follow this campaign, but the campaign is how the game is supposed to be played and how it's meant to be played, and everything in the game is in service of playing that campaign as you explore Yeld. It gives you these 7 very specific points of reference to travel one to another as you progress from rank 0 to rank 4, and then eventually you get to either decide you want to go home back through the door and leave Yeld forever, or you want to confront the vampire prince Dracul and defeat him once and for all, and then have the consequences of maybe now ruling Yeld yourself or deciding if you want to leave it and go home.
I would say the last thing on this is that another reason that we've created these is because we've asked people to rotate the GM role. That is a part of Yeld. We ask players to each take a turn to run games, and that's a really daunting task for some people, right? So creating these easy to, put together and run adventures was the way to make that daunting task much more manageable. That's a huge question for a lot of people. I don't feel comfortable running. Do you have content I can just run? This is what that looks like.
Okay, yeah, because that was something we really appreciated about this game. I think, Julie, you can speak to this a little bit as our house GM.
Yeah, I pointed this out in the post-mortem, but the explicit instruction in the rulebook that the rotation of DMs is like a gameplay expectation. Like, the game won't fall apart and stop working if you all, as a group, decide to just not do that and have one GM. But the text of the game wants you to rotate, and I think that's a really excellent goal, and I wish more games were built with that in mind. We're seeing more games that are trying to make porous the relationship between GMs and players from that kind of impartial referee standard of old. And I think it's decisions like that that help get out of something of the GM as narrative crafter rut that I'm finding the industry kind of falling into. And, this is something we see with the influence of a lot of the really huge actual plays being like a way people get into the hobby is they'll see people who have a ton of experience with storycraft, like your Matthew Mercers, your Brendan Lee Mulligans, crafting these really elaborate long-form narratives, and they'll feel these inadequacies because they're like, well, I want to do that and I'm playing the same game as them, but I am struggling to find this kind of this narrative North Star, and I feel not as cool. I don't feel like I'm up to the task, and it makes DMing as a whole seem like this impossible thing that you need a huge skill set to do. And I'm constantly encouraging players at my table, like, please try DMing. not as daunting. It is not as difficult as you are assuming it to be based on the cultural expectations of celebrity dungeon masters. Games can be just as fun and just as rewarding to run as they are to play in, and I think that Yeld making it not just on a structural level, mechanically, it is an easy and fun game to DM, taking it that step further and saying, not only is this easy and fun to DM, but you should use that as your reason to rotate DMing, and I think this would be a great game for a group who is not used to the idea that ever would the GM role rotate, you know, to all my forever GMs in the audience. Introduce Yeld to your group, play it, and at that end of that first adventure, say, okay, who's next? Because I think this is a great game to kind of cut your teeth on the concept that the GM role should be a more fluid group role and not just one that falls solely on one person's shoulders.
Well, thank you for saying that. Very well put. That's very much how we think of it.
Agreed.
This idea that we wanted to have a shared GM was born out of being stuck with the worst GM of all time. And not every group, some groups have fantastic game masters who are very into what they do and just want to do it, but not everybody's that lucky. And we were stuck with a game master who would not leave us alone and would not let anybody else have a choice. So we specifically created a game where the explicit rule was you had to rotate. But I think it's really unfair for people to expect the game master to do all the work. I think as a game master, it's very easy to get exhausted. I'm sure you can speak to this. It's very easy to get overwhelmed. And it very much, even if you're not doing it professionally or semi-professionally, or as, you know, as a pursuit like, you know, we are, even then it can just be overwhelming and take so much of your time. So we really wanted to create a set of rules that you could very easily pick up, and you could very easily say, now it's my turn to game master. Here are the very specific steps I go through to build an adventure, to build monsters, or to use the pre-existing monsters that we provide. We wanted it to be easy, and we wanted it to be the kind of thing where you're excited as a player to get to take your turn. You're excited to say, wow, you just did something really cool in the last game. Let me iterate on it in this new game. We really very much believe that the story we tell together as a group in Yeld is much more exciting than just one game master story in Yeld. Although that can be awesome too, if that's the path people decide to take.
Yeah, and to kind of bounce off of what you were saying earlier, Jules, is I feel like with the current ideas around the game master or dungeon master role, you know, there is that intimidating factor of seeing these people who are, you know, professionals do it and having the assumption that you need like a master's degree in improv comedy in order to be a successful role player or a successful game master. And, you know, when you finally do get that group of, you know, 4 to 6 friends together to run a game, and one of them decides, okay, I'm going to run a module for us, or I'm going to do something for us, and you're there in that module or in that game for, you know, let's say like a year and a half, when it comes to the next game, guess who's now suddenly the most experienced DM in that group who will probably have the easiest time running it again? That same person. It's why you have that forever GM, because they're now the person who has taken on the role once, and it kind of falls on their shoulders to do so again and again and again, because everyone else would be new to it and are still scared. But having this rotating cast system means that everyone's going to get an equal opportunity to share that role, to get comfortable in that seat, which I think is just healthier for the community as a whole.
Skylar, you're spitting. You're completely on point. It's all inertia. It's all momentum.
And so I like the way that Yeld, I think, breaks that inertia in a way that I think is good for the gaming community and for TRPGs as a whole. I think that a lot of others could really learn from that ethos of design. And with that, we just want to take a small moment here to say thank you so much again for taking this time to do this little interview. This was super insightful. I feel like I got to geek out a lot when you were mentioning the references that were big inspirations for you, getting to hear some of your thoughts. I was on my end of the microphone silently screaming like, yes, finally someone talks about opportunity cost in games. So I hope this was fun for y'all, because I had an absolute blast. I don't know about you, Neo and Julian, but...
Over the moon. So happy with this interview, and thank you both so much for coming on and joining us for this part 1 of the interview.
Do you have any final words on the first segment of this interview you'd like to share?
Thank you so much for having us. We love to talk about the game, and we love to talk about game design and where games are right now, because that's when you're playing them, right now. So it's a great opportunity.
And for anyone interested in playing Yeld, obviously we're going to have links in the description to the any places that you can buy the rulebook for the Magical Land of Yeld. This will be obviously old news by the time this come out, but I also just saw the announcement today of Yeld Minis. Super exciting. Over the moon that that's going to be happening.
They're so cute. They're so adorable.
Thank you very much.
And if y'all want to end with just a plug of where can folks find y'all?
Well, of course, you can find us on DriveThruRPG and Tabletop Bookshelf. You can also visit our own site at yeldstuff.com, and stores can order The Magical Land of Yeld from our distributor, Indie Press Revolution.
Much love to Indie Press Revolution. We have a lot of love for a lot of their games.
And if you want a little more love from this game in particular, then feel free to check out the follow-up interview that's going to be hosted on our Patreon. We got 5 more juicy questions with maybe some bonuses thrown in as well. So if you want even more insight, want even more of the absolutely lovely Jake and Nick here and their wonderful insights, then feel free to go on and check that out in the Patreon. But until then,
3, 2, 1,
Hi, and thank you for listening to our podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, then we'd really appreciate if you left us a review. If you really like what we do here and want to support us further, you can join us at patreon.com/tinytablepodcast. Our business email is also open for inquiries at tinytablebusiness@gmail.com, and all of our socials can be found in the episode description for any shenanigans you might want to follow. Till next time, see ya!